And from a CEO perspective, what sort of attributes do you think a CEO needs to have?
Some of the main things that you need to have is, I think you need to have the ability to try and understand what matters to people. One of the most important principles for me within a team environment is to create that balance between making quick decisions when necessary and then making decisions that have the ability to last. The best thing to do is to say, who's the best person to make this call? And then give that person the power to do it.
I think it's about looking outwards more than inwards. It's important to think about things for yourself and think about how you as a business want to respond to certain things. But I think because the world's moving so fast, it's really important that you are plugged into what's happening.
Right.
So for us, it's a combination really of understanding what's happening in the industry, be true to yourself. I think too many people try to emulate and mirror who they perceive as successful CEOs or successful leaders. And I think if you actually go and have a look at it, you'll find that pretty much most of the most successful CEOs got there because they were true to themselves. That was actually what made them unique and what made them achieve a lot of what they did, is that they believed in doing things the way that they represented, and they stuck to that.
Welcome to the Brilliance Talks show. Today, I'm excited to welcome Lee Kuyper, the CEO of Alula Technologies. Lee, welcome, and it's great to have you with us. And let's start with a bit of background. How did you get started? Talk to me.
Thanks, Simac. It's really good to be joining you today. Yeah, so my background goes an interesting path. I started off in finance. I studied to be an accountant. I did my sort of training at PwC back in South Africa. When I completed and qualified as a chartered accountant, my sort of program of not internship articles, which is what they call it in South Africa, came to an end, and PwC decided to second me to what at that stage was the largest public-private partnership in South Africa, which is a project called the Gautrain, which is a high-speed train that connects Pretoria and Johannesburg, two major cities. And it was right at the start of that project, and they seconded me there as the acting CFO from PwC to this project. So I was thrown in the deep end as a young kind of professional, and that lasted about a year. But I realized when that assignment came to end that the one thing I didn't want to do was go back into sort of a professional services, consulting, finance type of role. Very quickly then left PwC and actually started at what's now become Alula at a company called Silverbridge back in 2007. I originally joined the business in the finance team as a commercial manager, working with pricing and contracts and all of those type of things. Within a year of being at the company, the executive in charge of sales was leaving the business, and the CEO of the business at that time came to me and said he thinks that I'd be well suited for the sales position to take over and manage the sales function within the business. And it was a really weird thing for me to have to think about and consider, but thought long and hard and really approached from the perspective of where do I ultimately want to end up. And I've always said to myself that I wanted to be in a position where I could really manage a business or start a business or do more than just the finance piece of the business. And I felt that getting experience in sales was a really good way to complete that picture, or to get a more rounded experience. So I agreed to do it for 3 years, and almost 3 years to the day. After that, I moved from there into various other roles, operations, product development. Eventually was the CFO and COO of the listed holding company in South Africa. And then about 2 years ago, that business was acquired by a UK-based private equity company called Rock's Equity Partners, with the aim of creating a new technology group headquartered out of the UK, which is now today Alula Technologies. Back in mid-2023, I moved across to the UK with my family from South Africa, and have then since that day been heading up the Alula Technologies group as CEO.
Thanks for interesting journey. So you started off as an accountant, and then you went into sales, so different, and now from CFO to CEO. Talk to me, how is that? What's been the most memorable moment of your career so far in this journey?
I think it's difficult to pick one memorable moment. I think that there's many highlights, many challenging things. But I think for me, it's working with the group of brilliant people that we've had over the years, some who are still with the business and some who aren't. I think being able to create a business which is a typical software business ultimately, but that where we've done a few things slightly differently, and we've been able to, I think, put our own kind of print on how the business thinks and therefore engages. has really been, I think, the main highlight.
Okay. And from a CEO perspective, what sort of attributes do you think a CEO needs to have? Or what are the top three attributes do you think a CEO needs to have?
Yeah, I think the main thing, or some of the main things that you need to have is, I think you need to have the ability to try and understand what matters to people.
Okay.
Because I think ultimately in most businesses, maybe not in all businesses, but in most businesses, you're working with people and people matter, whether those are customers or whether those are people that work in the organization, or whether those are just various stakeholders.
Right.
So I think as a CEO who really takes that ultimate responsibility to engage externally and internally, I think you need to be able to understand what matters to people as maybe the first one. I think the second one is then to have that ability to translate what it is that you're trying to achieve into that framework of what matters to them. I think I've found that's always been really important. And having that ability to switch between the different types of engagements and the different types of stakeholders, I think is really important.
And the third one?
The third one, yeah, I think being able to just be quite open and direct and honest, I think with yourself, maybe first and foremost,
yes,
as well as then those around you. I think that's a key ingredient. I think you need to be able to be straight with people when things aren't necessarily working the way you want them to work. But similarly, you need to be able to also be open and encouraging and inspiring when things are going well and when there's things that you see that are aligned to what you're wanting to achieve.
Yeah, that's a very important point. So you mentioned how often do you actually hold a mirror up to yourself and be honest with yourself? That's what you just mentioned. How often do you see yourself doing that in a, I don't know, given day, a week, or month?
Yeah, I would say daily. I guess there are moments every day where that happens, but I would say almost maybe more of a ritual that I have is over the weekend. So, it's maybe not always the ideal time to do it, but I find when you have a little bit of that space and you have a little bit of that distance, it's a good time to reflect and it's a good time to think about what has happened in the past week, what's coming in the next week, and how that all fits into the context of what you're doing, who you want to be. So I find it pretty much daily. There are little moments where you reflect and then ask yourself how you've responded to a certain situation or how you've dealt with a certain situation. But I think really over the weekend is when I probably do most of my reflection in that regard.
Is that a non-negotiable for you, where you do the self-reflection on the weekend?
Yeah, I don't think it's that deliberate. I don't think
Right.
it's that deliberate that I could say it's non-negotiable. So it's not like I set aside a specific time on a specific day to go and do this. I think it's just more, so I'm generally a very early riser. I get up way before my family does normally. So it gives me a good few hours normally on a Saturday and a Sunday, whether that's just sitting outside with a cup of coffee or sitting at my desk. Sometimes if there's some stuff I want to catch up on or whatever, then that gives you that opportunity to just naturally take that time and reflect a little bit.
Brilliant. And you mentioned about understanding people, right? Understanding your team better and communicating with them. What is the thing that you want your team to know or learn when they see you work or when they interact with you?
I think probably one of the most important principles for me within a team environment is to create that balance between making quick decisions when they are necessary and then making decisions that have the ability to last. And I see those two things in some sort of a balance. So maybe to explain what I mean, sometimes when speed is of the essence and you need to make some sort of a call or you need to give some sort of a directional decision, then the best thing to do is actually to say, who's the best person to make this call?
Yes.
And then give that person the power to do it. Whether that's yourself or whether that's someone else in the team, and then just ultimately say, we don't have time to get consensus. We don't have time to get buy-in. What we need now is speed. Speed is of the essence. And then you will need to bring everyone along post the decision, as opposed to in some instances where where things are maybe a little bit less time sensitive, but you want to build you want to make a call, which is something that you want to build on or something that, is fundamentally going to be with you for a long period of time. Then you need to make sure that decision is one of consensus and one that's got buy-in. So it's like a really important principle for me is that sometimes you can't go through consensus. You can't go through getting everybody's buy-in, and you need to trust whoever takes the lead in that moment. And sometimes that's you as the CEO, but sometimes it's also not. Sometimes it's somebody in the executive team, or sometimes it's somebody in the business where they're in the best position to make that call.
Yes.
And then other times you actually need to go through a process to get consensus, to get input, to get buy-in. And that's typically those type of decisions and changes are things that are really solid. They have solid foundations because everybody feels part of them.
That's a brilliant culture that you have out there. And we always say success favors speed. So I think that's when you strike that fine balance. But talking about that, how do you approach risk in your business? Do you play safe or swing big?
I think it depends. I think generally as a smaller business, you have to swing big. You have to take a bit more risk. I think we're not a business where I think about it as if you're a smaller business, you taking risks can have significant impact in terms of making the business better. If you're a very big business, taking risks is okay because you're big enough to absorb them. And if you make a mistake or two or three, it's fine. You can absorb it and move on. Yeah. If you're sitting in the middle, sometimes I think is where you're a little bit risk shy because it hurts a lot if you get it wrong, and it maybe doesn't make as much of a difference if you get it right, just relative to your size. Yeah. So I think our business where we are, which is fundamentally a business that was born out of South Africa, relatively on global scale, a fairly small business, and looking to expand the business globally. I think we have to take some risks. We have to make some decisions sometimes which we don't have all the information on, and sometimes they will work, sometimes they won't. But yeah, I think there has to also be a healthy balance.
Yeah. And for the listeners out here, tell us more about Alula Technologies, that particular journey, how it's grown significantly over the past few years, and what Alula Technology does actually.
Yeah, so Alula is really an amalgamation of a number of different businesses that have come together to form the Alula Technologies group, really with a strong heritage out of South Africa. So within South Africa, we have got a really high quality level in terms of software businesses, financial services. Fundamentally today is a software and solutions business for both the insurance industry as well as health. And really where those two intersect is our sweet spot. So using health data and understanding the wellness and behavior of people related to their health, and then taking that into the context of risk for the purposes of insurance. We're a business that has been doing business in the African continent, or at least parts of our business doing business in the African continent for almost 30 years now, which for a software business is quite a long time. So gone through many evolutions, many iterations of the business. But today, doing business not only in 16 countries across Africa, but also in the UK, the US, as well as the UAE.
Okay. And what is that business problem that it's solving for in the insurance sector, which is different from other providers?
Yeah. So I think fundamentally the main thing for us is making sure that customers are future-proof in whatever the solutions are that they're putting. I think too many, especially larger organizations, are tied into technology which they have to live with for many years. We obviously want our technology to be used for many years, but we don't want to be we don't want it to be because they're tied in. So we want to make sure that the technology that we have can plug into and integrate into sort of a new modern digital world. It can plug in and plug out as easily on either end of that transaction. And we also want to enable our customers to use the technology themselves as much from a business user perspective as from a technical perspective. So not be reliant on us, not be reliant on big technical teams to do the work. And then I think the other one for us that's really important is using data to understand and gain insight of individuals, and how you then pull that into essentially process technology, automation technology at the right points in time.
Got it. And what's been the significant growth in the past 5 years, let's say, including when COVID hit you?
Yeah, so I think COVID was a really interesting time for us. So we took, I guess, not a bet, but we made a decision around about 2015, late 2015, that we were going to move all of our technology stack onto cloud. Cloud was it's not as if cloud just arrived at that stage, but it was starting to become more and more of a focus, especially for some of the bigger technology businesses. We work very closely with Microsoft, so there was a lot of influence from them in terms of our thinking. And where we essentially got to was around about 2017, 2018. We were in a position where we had made that call and we'd invested heavily into our products that basically it could only run on cloud. It was cloud native solutions. And we were actually up against quite a bit of resistance from customers, from the market, and people were not really buying. They got it and they said, yes, we think this is something that will come and this is something that will be a reality, but probably in financial services, which is where we really operate, it's going to be something further down the road, or not really sure whether proper line of business systems will ever run on the cloud. And then obviously COVID hit. And overnight, the customers that we were trying to convince for 2-3 years to move onto a sort of more modern digital cloud-based solution were calling us and saying, we need to now move our entire workforce into a remote environment. We need to be able to connect from wherever we are. We need the security that goes with that. We need the flexibility that goes with that. And that's where we saw a lot of growth coming from.
Excellent. And so what is the kind of, are you allowed to share numbers in 2019, 2022, where we are today, 2024, 25? How's that growth been for the audience?
Yeah, it's a bit of a difficult one because, as I say, it's growth through both the size of the business growing, the kind of the cornerstone of the business, as well as the number of acquisitions that we did over especially the last few years. I would guess we're probably close to double, maybe in terms of, maybe slightly less, but kind of at least 50% more than what we were.
Fantastic. So for the CEOs listening in, what do you wish more CEOs knew about scaling a business?
I think the hardest lesson that we've had to learn, and I think something that I find a lot of people struggle with, is unfortunately, it's not always the best product that wins.
Right.
So having a good product is really important. And I think obviously any business that's a product business needs to put a lot of focus into making sure that it has the best product. But that on its own does not guarantee success. And I think there's lots of examples all over a lot of industries where it isn't necessarily the best product that's always the biggest business. So when it comes to scaling, you can have a really good product, but if you don't have the machine, the engine that can do it in a repeatable way, that can plug into networks, whether that's through partners or whether that's through acquisitions or whether that's just through your own efforts, you struggle to scale. So I think for me, that's probably the most important thing that I would say to someone that wonders what's one of the things that we need to keep in mind when we scale. So it's not about ignoring the product and making, and making compromises on the product, but that on its own is not enough. When you want to scale a business, yes, you've got to have the product, but it's a lot more than just the product.
Yeah. And that's an interesting point, right? So most of the businesses have a lot of products, a lot of services that they offer. How does one go about actually choosing, okay, this is the right product, or this is a service that will, like in your case, double up the investments or grow it by 50%? What kind of attributes or what kind of angles that you'll consider, look for, and what kind of risk you'll assess during that part of the journey?
I think it's got to be something that's repeatable, and that's repeatable in a, if you like, generic way. So what you can't do is you can't have a product that is so reliant on very expert, very, very niche capabilities, because that's always going to be hard to scale.
Right.
So if even if it's a really good product, if you need to go and build out capabilities either yourself or convince a partner to build out those capabilities, and those are not really standard, then it's always going to be much slower, much more expensive, and much more risky. Whereas if you can create product which does what it needs to do, has the right value prop to the customer, but you're able to repeat regularly, either yourself or through a partnership, using somewhat generic skills, I think then you find the sweet spot.
Fantastic. All right. And talking about your influence, today you started off as an accountant, you went to the CFO, actually even sales, and then CEO. Talk to me, who or what had the biggest influence on how you lead today?
I think a number of people. So over the years, I've worked with many great people, colleagues, managers, the previous CEO of and founder of the business that I joined back in 2007. But I think probably the biggest influence was my father. So my father was a headmaster. He's now retired, but he was for most of his career a headmaster of a primary school. And I think I always observed how he was quite strict and quite traditional in many ways. And took a lot of the things that he was doing, rightfully so, quite seriously, but in many other ways was quite non-traditional. Probably, I would guess, pushed the boundaries a little bit in terms of the way certain things were done. And specifically, I think when it came to the way you work with people, I think that was for me probably the biggest, or has been the biggest influence, and still is today.
Wow. Okay. So is that also a reflection of how you lead today in your business?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's an interesting one as you start to scale a business, because I think when a business is smaller, it's always easier to be a bit more creative and a bit more flexible in terms of how you do things, and especially when it comes to how you do things with people. Um, as you start to scale, it becomes a bit harder because today we're sitting across multiple locations, and that you don't have that same level of personal interaction with people as what you do if you're all in the same place, a smaller team. But I think fundamentally it is the way that we try to look at the business and run the business. It's not that we try to push back against everything that's normal. It's just that we always try to ask ourselves, why does it work this way? Is there a reason why it can't work differently? Or is this consistent with the way that we want to work? Does it kind of align to the values that we've got?
Yeah, which brings me on the team side. And what's your approach to building high-performing teams or individuals?
Yeah, I think in a way I've covered it a little bit in the dynamic of balance and that thing of kind of making sure that calls and decisions are made in the right way. I think another aspect of that is just being extremely open with each other. I think especially in scenarios where things maybe aren't going to plan. I fundamentally believe that nobody wants to underperform.
Yes.
Or wants to not do what's expected of them. So if you start from that assumption and that belief, then essentially it's about figuring out what the reasons are why you're not performing, why things are not going well. And if you can start to figure those out, then you can break that down and you can make a call around whether that's something that can be addressed and changed over time. And you can give those people your support and help them to learn or adapt. Or you can come to the conclusion that it's something that won't change. And then you need to own that and move pretty quickly.
Fantastic. And which brings me on, what's the culture approach within the company when it comes to failure because you allow a tech business also.
Yeah.
And it's part and parcel of innovation, if I put it rightly. So what's your kind of approach out there?
Yeah. So I think, two things maybe. The first one I would say is what I've touched on. I think approaching it fundamentally from a problem first, not person first. So if there's failure, what was the problem? And not going, this was Lee that just didn't do well enough or just messed up, whatever. Because very often, or very seldom, is it the individual that's actually dropped the ball and that failure was caused because of the individual. It was more because of the problem, because of the circumstance, because of the assumptions you made. So that kind of brings me on to that second piece, which is I think what we try to do in assessing failure and working with failure is always looking at it and saying, what are the options that are available to us? Yes, we need to learn from what happened in the past, but given that, let's break it down. And I typically like to work in threes. It's a bit of a sort of running joke within the business where he always has three things, but break it down into the options that are available to you and pick the one that you believe is then the best option, and then make sure that you just take the next step that's in your control. Don't get overwhelmed by what has gone in the past, and don't get overwhelmed by what might happen in the future, because a lot of that's out of your control. So figure out what the best direction is given the options available, and then take the next step that's in your control.
Fantastic. So is that the power of three that you have within the organization that everyone knows? Lee always talks about the power of three.
Yes, I think so. As I say, it's a bit of a running joke. So it's typically, and it's not something I necessarily do deliberately, but just typically breaking things down into three just feels natural to me. Yeah. So typically when we have those types of situations and we need to assess a problem or assess a way forward, just somehow normally break it down into three options and then choose which one we believe is the best of the three to follow. Yeah, but it's something that I think also that people start to pick up on, and it becomes a little bit of a way of working.
Great. Okay. And let's switch on to the trends which we are seeing. What's one trend or shift in your industry that excites you or concerns you?
Yeah, probably the standard answer that anyone today is going to give is around AI. Yeah, I think, and it's both. It excites me, but it also concerns me. I think the excitement is that we're able to do so much more, so much faster, and have so much of a bigger impact than what we were able to do in the past because of AI. And that's really exciting. To have a business with a lot of expertise that sits in its people, it sits in its IP, to supplement that and augment that with the powerful tools that are now available is really exciting, because we can move quicker, we can do more. And I think to be in business at this time is really exciting because it's really shaping, it's forming, it's not quite standard at this stage. Having that opportunity to be part of figuring it out, I think is really exciting. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, and which brings me, yes, there's always the myth, right? AI is going to replace people, the machine learning. But given the industry you're in, with you got health data, which is big data, right? And you also have on the insurance side out there. So how does that actually, does that speed it up? What are the kind of trends you're using? What are technologies you're using to actually, within AI, to actually speed everything up?
Yeah, so there's different parts to it. So I think the first one is just productivity in the things that we do. So the jobs that we get done on a daily basis, whether that's writing code, whether that's reviewing code, or whether that's executing the tasks that we have in support functions across the business. So there's a base level of productivity that we have as a business where AI's just, I think, come in and helped us to do more with less is essentially the one part. The second part is within the products themselves. So again, I'd split that between efficiency and then a little bit more of intelligence. Right. So the efficiency piece is really just giving tools to our customers and the users of our products to do the same, essentially, and able to do more with less, be able to, using natural language, just engage with the product in a non-technical way. But then the last piece, which is really the intelligence piece, I think is where it's really exciting. I think we haven't quite seen as much adoption of that yet in specifically the world of health and insurance, because both of those areas are very highly regulated and there's a lot to be figured out before one starts to make decisions related to people's well-being or related to people's financial situation using AI. So we've started to do a lot of that sort of work. I think from a technical perspective, it's wholly possible and it's completely demonstratable, but it's about the implementation and the adoption of that within the industry that is regulated. I think that's the interesting piece that I think will come over the next few years.
Okay. And yeah, it makes sense. Also, leaving AI aside, is there a trend you believe most businesses are ignoring right now?
I don't think so. I wouldn't, not that I would say most businesses are ignoring. I know you say leave AI aside, but I think the other side of AI is there are elements of AI that concern me. And I think kind of twofold. The one is just almost a blind insistence that everything has to be AI or has to be AI enabled. So like a really silly example is I saw a thing the other day about an AI enabled golf club, where the golf club is now AI enabled and it's got AI built into the face of the golf club. And I was just thinking to myself, this is a bit absurd. It's getting to the point where you may as well just stay home and play PlayStation. But yeah, I guess on a more serious note, I think something for me that is maybe not being ignored, because I think it is being spoken about quite a lot, but I don't think it's quite being understood or dealt with yet, is the whole thing around AI taking jobs and employment. I think the thing that really worries me is humans have always shown the ability to adapt. So if you look at over history, it's not new. It's not a new thing that there are jobs that become obsolete and there are new jobs that emerge. That's happened many times over history, and humans have always adapted in that way. But there's two sort of fundamental differences now, I think. The one is the speed at which it's happening. So I think this, and that kind of ties a little bit into the regulation that sits together with AI in things like healthcare and in things like insurance or financial services in general. So making sure that the speed at which we do things is considered and not just thrown in without consideration. And then the second thing is there are just way more humans that require employment today than there ever have been. And I think the combination of those two things does mean that there probably would be some unintended consequences potentially that the world will have to deal with. And I'm not sure that's necessarily being dealt with enough. There's a lot of great stuff happening in the space of AI, and I think it's really exciting for all the reasons that I've said. But yeah, I think there's got to be a bit of focus without losing the value and the benefit, and not saying stick our heads in the sand and then push back. But there's got to be a balance.
Yeah, sure. And do you see that the speed at which AI is changing almost every industry, in your industry, especially with regulations, are regulations able to keep up with that pace and move it forward quickly, or is it very specific geographically where you are working?
Look, I think the frank answer is no. There's just no way that regulation can keep up. And I think that's even if the will was there, if the regulators and And if it was a full-time focus, and I think in many cases it is, there are industries where there's a lot of focus going into how we regulate AI, where it can be used, and if it is used, in what way it can be used. But I think it's just changing so quickly and evolving so quickly that I think it's near impossible for a regulatory body to be the sole custodian of that. I think it comes more like an ethical responsibility. So I think if we simply stick to what we're allowed to do by law, then I think there's probably some trouble ahead. Where I think if we take a step back and think about it and say, what's right? What does it feel that's the right thing to do? I think there's an element of responsibility for all businesses and individuals to take in the application of AI.
And given the distribution of the geography you all operate within, right? How is that manageable right now, where it's all bespoke to different countries or different continents, given the challenge of?
Yes, so it's an interesting new challenge for us. It's developed over the last few years, the last 2 years really. We've always been, and I think still have today, a big focus of people in South Africa. But today we also have people working out of England. We have a number of people working here in the UK, but we're also starting to do more and more business in the US. It ends up for some very long days where you have early calls from early in the morning with even something like South Africa, which in the UK winter's 2 hours ahead. And then obviously where you've got the US being, depending on where you are in the US, anywhere between kind of 5 and 8 hours behind, it can make for a very long day. But I think for us, ultimately, it's about moving quickly, assessing whether there's opportunity, and then when if there is, that we then make sure that we have the right partnerships and people on the ground in those different areas and regions.
Okay. And at a high level, what kind of percentage do you all actually allocate into innovation right now within the company?
Yeah, it's probably somewhere around kind of 20% to 25%, I would say. I guess it depends what you would classify as innovation, because I think in every single area of the business, even in support functions like finance and HR and marketing, there's innovation. So there's elements of everything we do that is being innovated, and that's specifically, again, when you talk about AI and how that impacts it. But if you talk about core product innovation, I think we've got a sort of specifically 2 areas of our business which are very new and innovative, that are built on top of or extensions of the kind of core businesses that we've got.
Okay. And you spoke about evolving, right? How do you see the industry evolving in the next 5 to 10 years, and what role do you envision Alula Technologies playing in that future?
Yeah, I think 5 to 10 years is a very long time for anyone to make a call on vision. Yeah, I think especially 10 years, I think that's probably a stretch where you're probably just guessing. But I would say in the next kind of 3 to 5 years, I think it's figuring out exactly this thing I've spoken about, this opportunity that we have to, as business, incorporate AI into the way we do things, but also incorporate and take AI into the industries that we operate. And I think for Alula, having been part of these industries of health and healthcare and insurance for many years, for decades, we have a, I think, unique advantage, because in a way, a lot of the people that are bringing solutions to the table are new to the field. They don't necessarily understand maybe the legacy and the history of the industry, especially something like insurance, where you see a lot of insurtech companies have failed over the last few years. They've launched great technology with great user experience, and that's been wonderful for the consumer, because it's all of a sudden this horrible thing of insurance being sold in a better way. But fundamentally, once that insurance policy is written, it actually needs to exist for some time. And if those fundamentals aren't working, then you can find yourself in some trouble. So I think for me, I think in the industries that we operate, both in insurance and in healthcare, I think the next 3 to 5 years are going to see, I think, significant change in the technology that technology brings. That has already been happening. It's not starting now. I think we're already on that journey. And Alula's role in it, I think, is really that balance between recognizing the past and the I guess the fundamental complexity that exists in some of these things that we do, but really challenging that with a lot of the flexibility and simplification that kind of new technology brings, and finding ways to work with the industry to improve because of that.
Okay. I think that brings me to another important point, right? So things are changing so fast. As a CEO, when you're looking at all these things happening, how do you actually then go about ensuring that Alula Technology stays in the forefront, at least in the top 10, top 3 within the world to get that level of, I would say, market share? So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it's about looking outwards more than inwards. Yeah, I think that it's important to think about things for yourself and think about how you as a business want to respond to certain things. But I think because the world's moving so fast, it's really important that you are plugged into what's happening.
Right.
So for us, it's a combination really of understanding what's happening in the industries that we're working in. So that's engaging with our customers, that's engaging with people that aren't our customers, but that could be our customers. It's about engaging with people around the industries that play significant roles, like regulators, like reinsurers. Those are people that have significant influence over the industry. So that's the one piece, is making sure that we're plugged into that and that we're getting that and taking that on board all the time in terms of what's happening. But on the other side, it's about being out there and plugged into what's happening in the world of technology. And as I've said, these two don't necessarily naturally coexist. There are places where they do, but sometimes just going and looking what's being done in some completely different industry can give you ideas and stimulate thinking, which you can bring back and say, but maybe if we apply something like that in this world. I would say almost like what we did with cloud in a way. So historically, where cloud was something that was seen as a little bit more of a consumer SaaS app world type of technology. And we said there's no reason why we can't run big line of business systems on the cloud while still maintaining the integrity of the system of record. And that's a good example. We've picked up a lot of that from what other people were doing in other industries. And I think that's how we try to stay ahead and make sure that we're at the forefront of what we're doing.
Fantastic. And so we have Alula Technologies on one side, but let's talk about Lee on the other side. How important has your personal brand been in growing your business?
Yeah, honestly, not that important.
Okay.
It may be a weird answer, but I've always taken the view, and I think we've collectively taken the view that the business needs to be built around a group of people, and that fundamentally, if the business can only grow and function if there's a single individual part of it, that then you're doing something wrong. Yes, people buy from people. That's obviously true, and that's definitely important. So it's important that you build your relationships and build your network. Part of that is building your own brand. But I think we've made the call to not build the business around a face or around an individual or any one single individual, and that includes myself.
Okay. Then tell me, I get that. So when it comes to Lee, again, what's something about your story that most people don't know?
I guess you define as most people, but I guess if you think about the people within our business and our customers, whatever, I think a lot of people don't actually know that I come from a finance background. Yeah, just because I guess I'm not a typical accountant. I think it's a lens that I look at the world through, but most people that meet me and that work with me in new relationships that I make don't know that.
Right. Okay. And talk to me about what does your inner circle look like as a CEO of the company? What does your inner circle look like? Maybe within the company, even outside the company.
Yeah. So within the company, there's obviously kind of our core team of the executive that I would say almost on a daily basis we're engaging, whether that's about what's happening in the business or about what we want to happen in the business, or sometimes just about things outside of the business. Just having those relationships is really important. Then maybe taking that circle one bit further. We've got a strong involvement and support from our shareholders and kind of a non-executive board. I think we're in a very fortunate position that we've got people around us. They've got a lot of experience, a lot of people that have started businesses, sold businesses, failed businesses, bought businesses, scaled businesses, turned businesses around, and that's both across multiple industries, across multiple markets, geographies. So I think we're very fortunate to have, I think, what is relatively for our size, quite a heavy hitting set of advisors and stakeholders around us, which are there to support us, and give us input and guidance, and challenge us in some instances. Yeah, and then maybe further than that, those are things very closely related to the business and how the business works and things. But beyond that, I mean, for me personally, my family is a big part of my inner circle.
Including your dad.
And including my dad, So it's still a relationship that's very dear to me, and my mother for that matter, both of my parents. So family is really important. Yeah, and then I've also got a number of people that I meet with on a regular basis
Sure.
to give input, which are not necessarily close to the business or part of my family, but yeah, I guess in some way coaching type of mentoring in a capacity. And that's either people that I may have worked with previously,
Sure.
or people that I've met or come across over the years, and we've just stayed in touch and we've agreed to have some sort of a regular rhythm. Yeah.
Okay. And when I speak to interview CEOs, it's all apart from the day-to-day functions. One of the key aspects of that is how do they stay physically and mentally fit? So if I had to ask, how does Lee stay physically and mentally fit to perform as a CEO every day?
Yeah. So physically, maybe not as much as I should do or want to. I enjoy running. And I think it's so anything like running or swimming or cycling, I think where you have that ability to almost kind of use your body, but also have a bit of time for yourself in your mind, I think is really useful, both physically and mentally. So I find for me personally, running and swimming are the two things which I try to do regularly, which help from that perspective. Yeah, and I think taking that time out to reflect is really important.
Sure.
It's something that I spoke about right at the beginning of the conversation. Yes. But I think if you're just constantly going and you're constantly in it, you don't have the space or the time to reflect for yourself and on your own kind of role within what you're doing, but even on the business. And I think very often, for me, I see that the role of the CEO is as much to work on the business as it is to work in the business, maybe even more. So it's really important that you're able to take that step back and actually look at what's happening. And you can only do that if you give yourself time. So it's being deliberate about that time and making sure that you actually spend time thinking and not just doing.
Okay. You said you're an early riser. How early do you wake up on any given day, apart from the weekends?
Yeah, the weekend's the same. I don't change the routine for the weekend, so it's normally about 4:35.
Wow. Okay. Good. Excellent. Okay.
It's a lot harder now in the UK. It's a lot harder in winter with the rain and cold. But yeah, that's typically my routine.
Yes, I get up at 5:30 almost every day. So there you go. Okay. And Lee, what would you say to the version of you who started this journey and where you are today compared to where you were 5 years ago?
I think definitely the one thing I'd say, this is something I'd probably say to anyone that's looking to grow their career and develop, is to be true to yourself, be yourself. I think too many people try to emulate and mirror who they perceive as successful CEOs or successful leaders, and they try to copy or try to emulate their behaviors, their mannerisms, their routines, etc. And I think if you actually go and have a look at it, you'll find that pretty much most of the most successful CEOs, if not all of them, got there because they were true to themselves. That was actually what made them unique, and what made them achieve a lot of what they did is that they believed in doing things the way that they represented, and they stuck to that. So I think that's hard to do. It's hard to do when you're faced with challenges and you're faced with difficult situations, which sometimes ask you to compromise. But I think that's the most important thing for me, is if you're true to yourself, it's just, I think ultimately you look back and you'll feel a lot better about it.
Being authentic. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And what's your best business book you've read or reading right now?
It's maybe not a business book. Okay. I've read a number of business books, but I think a book that I really enjoyed, and it's got elements of helping you think about business, is a book called Sapiens. Okay. I don't know if you know the book, but it's by an author, what's his name, Yuval Noah Harari, and he essentially takes a very distant look at sort of the history of humanity, how things evolved, and puts a lot of things in context over many years. And the reason why I say it has relevance in business, because I think the way that he takes you through that journey and describes it is exceptionally simple. So it simplifies things down to something that's really easy to understand. And I think that hearing those types of very complex, overwhelmingly enormous things in that simple way, I think is something that one can learn from. But also, I think when you're faced with challenges in your life and you have circumstances which maybe feel a little bit overwhelming, when you take a step back and you actually, from this perspective, look at the world, you realize actually how insignificant your problems are. And I think that helps when you take a step forward again, to actually have that perspective, to realize that actually what is maybe the biggest problem in your life right now is actually fairly insignificant. If you can just take that step back, figure out what the next step is, take that next step, you'll get through it.
Interesting. I'll put it on my reading list. And lastly, where would one find Lee if Lee is not working?
I beg your pardon?
I said, where would someone find Lee if Lee is not working as a CEO?
Yeah, no, spending time with my family. That's my biggest passion. And that's typically doing things with my family when the weather's good. We enjoy just being outdoors and going for walks and hikes and spending time together.
Okay. And sorry, I said last piece of advice for all the CEOs who are going through a tough time or want to become a CEO. What is the one piece of advice you will give them right now?
Yeah, I think it's probably to repeat some of the stuff I've already said. One, be true to yourself, that thing of being authentic.
Right.
Every single person has some value that they bring to that role. Don't try and copy something that you believe is the formula, because I don't think there is a formula.
Yeah.
So be authentic while still learning. It's really important to take on board the learnings, and there's nothing wrong with looking at what others have done and learning from that. Yeah, and then I think that thing of assessing what your options are. I think sometimes we get too overwhelmed and caught up by things that are outside of our control, or things that are not really options that are available to us. What if this and what if that, and all of those sorts of things. So my advice would be really just have a look and figure out what the real options are that you have available to you. Pick whichever one you believe is the best one, and then take the next step.
Fantastic. Lee, thank you very much. Great having you on the show. Thank you.
Thanks. It was great being here. Thank you.
Thank you.